Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
What I would say is that in the UK we pay corporation tax at 20%. There's no sweetheart deal. It is absolutely the same corporation tax rate as everybody else. So we pay corporation tax in the UK at 20%, and actually globally our corporation I beg your pardon, our effective tax rate over the last 5 years or so round about 20%, which is very close to the UK rate.
That was Google speaking. I'm joined now by the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. Welcome to the Sunday Politics. What single step would you take to make sure that companies like Google, Apple, Amazon pay a fair and appropriate level of tax?
Openness and transparency. I want them to, first of all, I want the information about how this deal was arrived at, and I want them in future to be able to publish their, well, the tax records, so that we can all have openness.
The British part of the tax records?
Yes, of course, yes. So that we can have openness and transparency. We can see what's fair, what's just. The Chancellor came out and said this was a major success, but we can't tell because we haven't got the information.
That's about foreign multinationals. Would you extend that to British major companies publishing their tax? We learned this morning 6 out of 10 of the UK's biggest companies are not paying any corporation tax at the moment.
Yes, I would. The suggestion's been put forward by others about the FTSE 100. I think that's a good idea. They publish their accounts anyway, and I don't see that there'll be any commercial disadvantage of them publishing their tax returns as well.
And so you think that transparency, maybe not alone, but that would be a major step forward?
I think it's one step forward, but not alone. We want country-by-country reporting as well. That's why I supported George Osborne on his negotiations in Europe on this. But
I think we're going to get an element of that now.
We are, but not enough. And what I found quite angry-making this morning, that we have revelations that although I was supporting George Osborne, the Conservatives were briefing their MEPs to vote against this in Europe. So I find that really frustrating. The other issue then also, I want HMRC to be properly resourced so that they can do the job. There's too many job cuts there. We've lost too much expertise. But in addition to that, there is time now to start thinking about how we review our tax system. The Treasury Select Committee is undertaking a review. That could be the start of, I think, of thinking again about how we tax companies.
Well, let's look at that, because corporation tax is levied on profits. And I think even if you got your transparency, you quickly find that the concept of profits, they can be moved around geographically, they can be manipulated depending on costs. Would you consider replacing corporation tax with, for example, a tax on corporate sales, because revenues are less malleable than profits?
It's one of the issues to be addressed. Nigel Lawson has done an article to that effect. Others have redefined economic activity. I think that's open for discussion now.
We're going to look at that.
We will do, but one of the most important things is to secure international agreement, because we can't have this situation where companies are shopping around the world to find the lowest tax regimes and then inventing their company structures to enable that to happen.
But if you had a tax on the revenues, it wouldn't matter what they moved around in terms of profit. Revenues are revenues, and it would be the revenues inside the UK that you would levy a tax on.
That's why it's worth looking at, and it might be a combination of that and economic activity as well.
Professor David Blanchflower, one of your economic advisors, though, he says that if you raise corporate taxes too high, companies may move to Ireland or elsewhere where they're lower. Do you accept that there has to be a limit?
There has to be a limit. There has to be some reasonableness about it. But again, if we can get international cooperation, and that's what we were seeking, you can then avoid this development of virtual tax havens that are taking place.
But would you want a common rate of corporation?
Not necessarily, but what you'd like to do is make sure that what you charge in your particular country is reasonable and fair, and you expect those companies to abide by that. I say with Google, and I listened to the Google representative this morning.
Mr. Barron.
The reputational damage to Google, I think, is immense, and I think the savings they've made in tax is not worth the reputational damage they've had.
Let's move on to the other big issue at the moment, Europe and our membership of the European Union. How did you vote in the 1975 referendum?
Against.
Against?
Against, yes.
In the 1983 Labour manifesto, it claimed that a commitment to radical socialist policies, quoting from the manifesto, was incompatible with membership of the EEC, as it was called at the time. It proposed its word, withdrawal. Did you agree with that at the time?
I did at the time, but I think that's long gone now. We're within Europe, and we're working with other socialist and social democratic parties within Europe to see how we can make Europe fair and how it can work, particularly with regard to workers' rights, employment rights, those sorts of things. And just take this tax issue. We need to be within Europe to ensure that we can secure those agreements about a fair tax system on companies.
But it's a lot of EU agreements that have allowed companies in the first place to move to Luxembourg, to Dublin, to Holland. Yeah. These are EU rules.
But that's why, by remaining within, we've got to remain within with our own reform agenda, and that's one of the issues that we need to see reform on.
You're committed, I mean, to take that phrase, radical socialist policies, from the Michael Foot Manifesto, you're committed to radical socialist policies. So how is that now compatible with remaining in the EU when it wasn't in '83?
Because we've demonstrated through the work that we have undertaken within the EU that we have secured some benefits from it in terms of a social Europe, employment rights. And in addition to that, there's real opportunities now in which we can work with others to secure that radical change. Withdraw from Europe at the moment, we think would not be beneficial. We'd lose jobs. It would undermine a lot of the benefits we've gained from it in terms of employment, and therefore that's why we want to work with others to reform it. The issue that I've got with the Prime Minister, we'll see what he comes back with.
And I want to talk to you about that in a minute. But on the social Europe issue, I mean, you say you want a more social Europe, but in France, you've got a socialist government that's moved to the right. In Germany, you have a centre-right government. Hungary, Poland, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Croatia, France, all either have the hard right in power or the hard right at the top of the polls. Where's your social Europe in that environment?
Well, that's why we'll work with socialist and social democratic parties across Europe, those in government and those in opposition.
But they seem to be in retreat.
Well, they are at the moment, but I think you'll see in the coming years what's happening in Europe. A wider debate is taking place. In some way, the referendum debate in this country will enable us to then look at those ideas of reform that we want to see.
Wouldn't it not, though, be fair to say that, like Jeremy Corbyn, you're pretty lukewarm about our membership of the EU?
Well, I've signed up to remaining within the EU, but that doesn't mean to say we accept that the EU is a perfect institution. We want to see reform and we want to use it to our advantage, but we'll only do that in cooperation. And I come back to this tax issue. Unless we get international cooperation, particularly across Europe, we will not solve this problem.
But you've got a Eurosceptic track record. I mean, I'm just wondering if you've had a late change of mind. Kate Hoey, for example, who is a leading Labour Eurosceptic, she said that you and Jeremy Corbyn actually consistently voted with Eurosceptic MPs on the EU, and I think that's true, isn't it?
On a number of issues, because we were frustrated about the slow pace of reform. But that doesn't mean to say we're in favour of coming out. It doesn't. We think it's better to be within the club and argue from within, and that way you can secure that commonality of agreement across socialist and social democratic parties.
Do you broadly support the changes that David Cameron's trying to renegotiate?
Well, I don't know what they are yet. Let's see what he comes back with. My fear is that if he doesn't treat this issue seriously, and it is just about party management within the Conservative Party, he could blow it. He could really blow this, and we could be outside of Europe and have the economic penalties as a result.
But even if he comes back with something you don't regard as satisfactory, or maybe even retrograde, you'll still campaign to stay?
Well, we'll campaign for our own reform agenda.
The government wants to get this referendum out of the way by the end of June, beginning of July at the latest. Will you cooperate on that timetable when it comes to the Commons?
We'll see what he comes back with. It looks as though they've penciled in June the 23rd. I think let's have it as soon as possible because we want the debate to take place, and delaying it I don't think would help. We want the debate to start now. That's why it'd be better for him to come back now fairly soon with what he's negotiated.
Get the debate going.
Yes.
Even if the campaign overlaps with the important elections in Scotland, England, London, Northern Ireland, Wales, on May the 5th?
That's the problem, but whatever time you put it to be frank, it's going to overlap with something.
Immigration is still going to be a huge issue in this referendum. The IMF says that almost 4 million immigrants will arrive in the EU between 2015, including last year, this year, and 2017. Almost 4 million. Should Britain take a fair share of that?
I think it's important that we cooperate with our European partners to make sure that we can accommodate those that need to come to this country. In addition to that, that we have systems in place that, for example, protect wages so that immigration is not used to undermine workers' wages.
But should we take a fair share of the 4 million?
I think we should. I think we should cooperate with others and carry the burden, because we're seeing, as in the refugee crisis, the majority of Britons want us to rise to that and ensure that we assist others and that others aren't suffering, that we don't stand on one side when people suffer.
Could you give an indication then of how many of the 4 million would be our share?
Not at this stage, no. That would be a matter for negotiating.
Even a ballpark figure?
No, that would be a matter for our negotiating with our European partners.
Should we volunteer then to be part of the EU quota system? Mrs. Merkel and the Commission want 160,000 already in Greece and Italy to be relocated through Schengen. We are not part of that.
No, we're not.
Should we?
No, we're not part of Schengen.
No, but should we be part of the 160,000?
We should be. I think we should be doing more in terms of assisting refugees coming in through Syria, and we should be doing more to take. I think those people who are in desperate need, people are drowning in the Mediterranean now.
Another 20
Another
overnight.
20. We cannot stand to that side. And this country has got a history of receiving refugees.
But I think people watching this, John McDonnell, would want some kind of idea of numbers, because numbers are important.
Well, it is important, and that's why we need to get into these negotiations very, very quickly with the other European partners and come back with practical proposals.
In 2013, you told a gathering of the People's Assembly it was a rally on immigration, that there should simply be open borders.
What I was arguing then, it was a piece of research by Rahul Gupta, who was looking at the long-term future of the globe, basically, is that inevitably in this century, we will have open borders. We're seeing it in Europe already. The movement of peoples across the globe will mean that borders are almost going to become irrelevant by the end of this century. So we should be preparing for that and explaining why people move. It's conflicts, it's because of poverty and destitution, and also climate change. In our policy making as politicians, we should be working now to see how we address that, because it will mean that we need to look at how we resolve conflicts, how we make the world more equal, and also how we tackle climate change. In that way, we can deal with the reality of the world, which means that people aren't forced to move, but there will be movement.
But total open borders? No controls?
I think at the end of this century, that's what will occur. We're seeing people ignoring borders already as they fly from Syria. So therefore, what we should be doing is making sure that there's no forced movement. We look at the push and pull factors, and we ensure that we have, as I say, conflict prevention, tackling of inequality, and also policies that tackle climate change. In that way, we can cope with the global pressures that are coming with regard to population and population movement.
So to do that, then, a Labour government, to prepare for that long-term movement, I understand, would be loosening controls as you move towards a state of no
what I'm
control.
saying is that if you look at all the analysis of what's happening over the next, 75 years, this century, what will happen, the movement of people is such that borders are very difficult to maintain, and that will happen by the end of this century. We should be opening up the debate of how we handle that. And one of the issues that we have to tackle is why people are moving. And it is about conflict, it is about climate change.
They're also moving because they want a better life.
Well, it's about poverty as well. That means greater equality, not just within our own country, but across the globe.
Now, I wanted to talk to you this morning about Google and about the EU, but I hope you'll come back and give me an interview on a longer, broader discussion about economic policy. So let me finish with a taster in the hope that you do. Back to Professor Blanchflower, your advisor, one of several. He says about you and Mr. Corbyn, you will have to accept the realities of capitalism and modern markets, like it or not. No more silly stuff about companies not being able to pay dividends if they don't do X or Y. Do you accept that?
That's why I appointed Danny as one of our advisors. I want objective advice. And when he doesn't disagree with them, I'd rather he said that. And we're having open public advice. I've established the architecture for our future development of economic policy. An economic advisory council, which includes Professor Stiglitz, Mariana Mazzucato,
no, I know
a whole
who
range
they are.
of them.
Are you going to accept his advice on that?
We'll listen to his advice and we'll take it on board. We'll listen to the advice from those range of economists that are advising us.
You wouldn't want to appoint them as advisors if you weren't going to listen.
No.
I'm trying to work out if you agree with them on that.
Well, we will test. We will test every policy and instrument we put forward. On that one, let me just say to you, on that one, we're hoping that we'd avoid any need for that by introducing, as we come into government, a real living wage. But in the meantime, we want to campaign with shareholders so that they pressurise their companies to abide by a real living wage. And I think there's an alliance to be built there.
But is it party policy that if companies don't pay what you regard as a living wage until it's made mandatory, that they shouldn't be allowed to pay dividends.
It's one of the ideas that we've floated for discussion, and we've put to our economic advisors as well to give us their views. And Danny, quite rightfully, has given us his views.
Angela Eagle says it would be unworkable and it's not
Yeah, well, that's why it's open for discussion.
So
but as I say, well, I think it's a really good campaigning tool for us now to work with shareholders to make sure they exert their influence to ensure their companies, on things like the living wage and actually on paying their taxes as well, make sure their companies are acting appropriately.
John McDonnell, I hope you come back and continue the debate with us.
I certainly will.
Thank you.